So welcome to another video on Griftlands, and this time around we're going to talk about some more advanced tips to help you master all three characters in the game. If you haven't seen or don't know Griftlands just yet, well, I'm going to be showcasing some gameplay behind me. You can also check out my previous videos on the channel, or just check out that link in the description down below to see the Steam store page for Griftlands, learn a little more about it, see some of the overwhelmingly positive reviews this game has received from the community. I'd also like to thank Play for sponsoring this video. So all that said, let's go ahead and dive into these tips for Griftlands. First up, I've got quite a few more general tips and then some specific ones for each of the characters you can play as. Number one is that money is good, really good in Griftlands. It's called Shills in Griftlands, and money can open up a lot of paths towards ginormous upgrades in this game, namely unlocking more slots for graphs, and sometimes just outright buying graphs can go a long way. But that's not the only way you're going to find money is useful. There are certain story events and moments per character, like say Rook and modifying his pistols, where money's really important to have, particularly at certain points in a given run. So you should always be trying to maximize the amount of shills that you're going to receive in the game, and sometimes that'll be as simple as just taking a higher paying mission option when you're offered two different missions. But you can also do things like decline cards. If there's nothing good for your build, just pass on those cards, gain that 10 shills, and that starts to add up over the course of a run, because you don't really want bad cards clogging up your deck anyway. And of course, don't waste your shills. Use them on things that are important, things that are gonna have like really game-changing impacts on your build or open up some new angle of play or really synergize with cards in your deck. Don't just buy random stuff that isn't really gonna help you much. Getting a gift for a friend, for instance, with a boon that doesn't really synergize with your build might seem nice. Yeah, I got a boon, but if it's not a boon that impacts your game or your build significantly, then that's kind of a waste of your shills. On that note, another tip is to click into characters in Griftlands and just read. Whether you're in a fight and about to kill somebody and want to see what kind of loot they're going to drop, for instance, that can be useful to see if that's something that's worth killing them over, taking that risk, or potential downside of making somebody hate you. That can go a ways. In a negotiation, or whether you're about to force somebody into a negotiation or maybe make them dislike you or hate you, you can check and see what that boon's going to be. If they hate you, maybe that's a really big downside. If you want to be friends with somebody and you try to force that, you can learn a lot by seeing what that boon's going to offer as well. Now, you won't always have boons unlocked. You may not know what they're going to be, but sometimes you will, particularly as you advance, do prestiges, so on and so forth. Learn the meta of characters a little more. Just knowing what is actually happening for every action you make goes a long way, and the way to learn more is to click into characters and read everything that you can. And building on that, another tip is to talk to everybody that you can and see what options exist. Doing things like provoking a character into a negotiation and then maybe even provoking them into a fight from there gives you opportunities to play your cards more, which can give you upgrades, gives you opportunities to upgrade your graphs, gives you angles to befriend or make people hate you, which can have advantages as well. So talk to people. I know sometimes it's just, tempting to burn through a run as quickly as you can, but if you really want to optimize and maximize, particularly at higher difficulty levels, you're going to have to put in the work sometimes to talk to folks and see what options are out there within a given run. On that note, another tip is that people hating you can be a good thing if you really meta game it. And this is something you're going to have to kind of play by ear and refine with experience. But essentially, if you make people hate you, if you provoke them, you can force additional fights and negotiations, as I mentioned, which allows you to upgrade your deck more reliably and consistently. Now, of course, you can't just go around fighting everybody if you're losing health and you're not positioning yourself well for like a boss fight with like 5 health left. That's probably not going to be a great idea. But if you can do it reasonably in a controlled way and can align with certain groups of characters that make sense for your run, then that can have benefits. So for instance, aligning with bandits instead of the alternative, maybe that goes away. You make all the bandits like you get certain boons that are really synergistic for you, you build towards those. That's great. So hating isn't always bad. It just has to be done in a controlled and planned fashion. Another tip I found helpful is to play your negotiations really aggressively. I tend to play Griftlands pretty aggressively in general, as opposed to focusing on defense. But negotiations in particular, it's pretty easy to restore resolve after combats. You're going to get little chip heals to your resolve over time, essentially. So sacrificing a little bit of your resolve, which is your health in negotiations, is probably fine. And you can just end fights more quickly that way and play them aggressively at some small cost to your resolve, which won't be a major issue. And that way you can have a stronger deck that just pushes through negotiations efficiently and powerfully. And then finally, you're going to accrue some item cards throughout your Griftlands run, particularly if you're murdering people left and right. And some of those powerful item cards are going to get destroyed after using them once or a couple times. And, you know, sometimes you have a tendency to just draw through those in a normal fight and just kind of use them carelessly. But I have to say, I think it's a good idea to save item cards for really key moments in big boss fights. I've had a few instances where I was literally going to be dead if it wasn't for a really key item card, say stunning a boss for a turn to give me that moment to recover or interrupt that big sort of attack. So saving up your item cards for when they really matter, instead of just kind of haphazardly using them, can be pretty darn important, as long as you don't feel like they're clogging up your draw too much and if they don't have replenish. So don't waste your item cards, or again, waste your money. So now moving on to each of the characters, I've got just a couple tips for each, little things to keep in mind as you're playing these. Starting off with Smith, let's go for the big green boy himself. Number one, be mindful of armor blocking your self damage and triggering your Moxie effect. Damage is gonna hit your defense stat first and may not actually adjust your health, which can be a problem. Also with Smith, just don't be afraid to manipulate your health. I know sometimes it's really scary to see that health number dwindling, but it's really the name of the game for Smith, is finding a balance between damaging yourself and utilizing that for natural bonuses and bonuses in your cards. You know, like some cards, you go below 50% health, you get this enormous upside, and going below 50% health may seem scary, but you can also really control that and maybe keep yourself bouncing between 45 and 50% health, and try to find that sweet spot where those sorts of cards are always powered up and really use that to your advantage. Moving on to Rook. The tip is to just gamble. Just gamble, because flipping your coin as Rook in negotiations has passive benefits. And of course, you can upgrade your coin to make those passive benefits even stronger over time. So gambling in and of itself is very vital and very powerful in negotiations. You can just kind of gamble 3 or 4 times and just wipe out entire arguments from your opponent, or sometimes just end fights by doing so much chip damage or gaining so much chip composure defense when gambling. That gambling in and of itself is powerful. Even if you don't hit the result that you want that empowers that next card, the gamble itself is really valuable. For Rook, I would also encourage you to build towards a very specific pistol modification. You're going to have an option to modify your pistols to have fewer chambers or more chambers. And depending on the kind of build you want for Rook, you can have some that benefit from having, say, empty chambers, or some that are more overcharge based, where you want to have fewer chambers. And you can even get a key card early in the run before having the option to modify your pistols. And keep that in mind. Maybe you've got a card you really want to build into that's empty chambers, so adding a chamber to your pistols for Rook will go further in a run. Even though I prefer to play overcharge in general, be willing to adapt and have a game plan there, so you don't get kind of a mishmash of cards that end up being counter synergistic instead of helpful. And then finally for Sal, she's a character who I think is a little bit more straightforward when playing. Doesn't have quite as many extra mechanics as Rook and Smith, but still a few things to keep in mind. If you're going for a bleed build with Sal, keep in mind that although it can pump out a lot of damage, sometimes it's a little bit slow in its damage output, so be mindful of that and keep a deck that is able to defend yourself while enacting your bleeds. There are some things that are like heals based on bleed, but also you just might want some defense as well, to make sure you're giving time for your bleeds and your damage over time effects to actually stack up and kill opponents, because you might not have as much burst damage if you go for bleed cards. I would also say bonus actions, I think, go really far with Sal. I mean, I think they're great with every character, of course, because you just get more cards that you can play in a given turn. But Sal in particular with combo effects, I think, can do a lot with bonus actions. So any graphs that give you the ability to play extra cards through extra actions are very, very powerful. So definitely focus towards those and keep an eye out for those, because those can be absolutely run defining. And I think that's it for my tips for Griftlands. I'm still learning a lot about this game myself as I play more and more, but these are some things I've picked up along the way that have helped, and a lot of them are still, you know, adaptable to your specific situation and run and build and character, but just knowing what to look out for, I think, can go a long way towards making you stronger. And a few of these little specific tricks will help here and there in a run stabilize and keep you alive. So all that said, if you have any tips of your own for Griftlands, of course, feel free to share those down there in the comments below. I would also remind you to check out that link in the description for Griftlands. I think you'll love this game. Pretty much everybody who plays it does. That's why the reviews are so insanely strong on Steam. So you can go read those yourself, read more about the game, see the latest updates on the Steam store page right there in the description. So thanks much for hanging out. Thanks much for watching, checking out that link. And until next time, game on.